of other organizations. I, for one, believe that the Department of Defense has to contend with what is, not with how we view, how we wish things would be. And my question is for Admiral Titley. Could you please describe the relationship between CO2 in the atmosphere and global temperature?
Senator, thank you for the question, sir. I give some talks into the public on this, and basically what I tell people is what you've asked me is cutting-edge 19th century science here. A bunch of old dead white guys figured this stuff out, starting with Fourier, Arnhus, Tyndall. By the time you get to 1896, we were actually doing calculations of global warming. Now, it was with stubby pencil and paper, but we actually kind of figured it out. So in basic terms, energy comes in at one wavelength. Energy comes back out through the atmosphere at a different wavelength. The carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases actually re-radiate that longer wavelength. The short stuff comes in from the sun. The long stuff gets basically bounced around, reabsorbed, re-emitted, and that's really good for us. If we did not have greenhouse gases, we wouldn't all be here because we'd be living on an ice cube. It would be about 59 degrees Fahrenheit colder than it is right now. So greenhouse gases provide life on Earth, but there can be too much of a good thing. And we have literally formed human civilization in a period of wonderful climate stability, where we have not been varying either the greenhouse gases or much of the other part of the atmosphere. So we've had this stability. Now, as we inject a whole lot of extra greenhouse gases, they're just doing what physics does. So they're re-radiating, warming the atmosphere, as you talked about, sir.
And tell me about the observations on page 3 of your testimony. It seems to me that there's a nearly one-to-one relationship between global temperatures, CO2, fossil fuel consumption, and sea level and ocean temperature. Is that about right?
Yes, sir. Everybody here at this table knows that correlation doesn't necessarily mean causality, but there has been a lot of work shown.
How would you establish causality in an experiment involving our planet?
We only have one planet. That makes it kind of tough to run the control case, if you will. So this is what the computer models help you with. But
Thank you.
We only have one planet. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Senator Schatz, could I comment on that? You said that the 4 people...
Mr. Chairman, I do have a meeting at 4:30, and I did not ask a question of Mr. Steyn. I apologize. I do have to go. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to make a comment on what
welcome to give a response. Sure.
I'd like to make a comment on what he said, because he said that these people represent a tiny minority point of view. The 97% consensus from these papers does not argue for the kind of measures that are being discussed here today. We are talking about the greatest, just to take the pro-climate people at their word, we are talking about the greatest shift in the global economy that has ever been contemplated. We hear a lot of talk about risk management. This is a hell of a risk. And it requires, if we are to take these pro-climate people at their word, it would require the greatest societal consensus, left, right, and center across North America, Europe, and the developing world. So to exclude, if you exclude Professor Christie, if you exclude Professor Curry, if you exclude Professor Happer, if you exclude the French weatherman who basically just lost his job for writing a book countering climate change, if you refuse Professor Leonard Benson, whose career was destroyed because he wanted to meet with a skeptic think tank, the great Swedish climatologist, if you exclude the Nobel Prize winner in physics from 1973 and the Nobel Prize winner in physics from 1988, you wind up with what has happened to climate alarmism, where the poll showed, the real 97% consensus, that only 3% of Americans view this as their overriding priority. The point that Admiral Titley made about things we could do, he brought up Superstorm Sandy as an example of climate change. You know what would have stopped Sandy? If they built the same storm barrier that the Dutch coast has, that the Russians have in St. Petersburg, and that London has with the Thames barrier. For a couple of $1 billion, you wouldn't have had water in the New York subway. But instead, when we talk about all the saving the planet stuff, the flood barrier never gets built. And that's what elected legislators should focus on. The real issues involving them now, not the pie-in-the-sky stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Steyn, and I would note Dr. Titley made reference to dead white guys, and in response to Senator Shant's question about 97% of scientists in this one bogus and discredited study, in the year 1615, I suspect if you asked, 97% of scientists at the time would have said categorically that the sun rotates around the earth. And yet an individual named Galileo dared to actually be a scientist and take measurements and stand up to that enforced consensus. And I would note, it was the Roman Inquisition that brought heretics before it who dared to say that the earth rotates around the sun. And today, the global warming alarmists have taken the language of the Roman Inquisitions, going so far as labeling anyone who dares point to the actual science as a denier, which is, of course, the language of religion. It is calling someone a heretic. And anytime you hear people saying scientists should not question the conventional wisdom, you are hearing someone advocating essentially for the abolition of science. Senator Udall.
Chairman Cruz.